The city was still waking up as sunlight bounced off the glass walls of Blake and Hammond Enterprises, a towering steel monument to wealth, power, and ambition. Inside, the polished marble lobby echoed softly with the distant rhythm of designer shoes on tile. A woman in heels clipped past the security desk, not bothering to look back. The front door slid open with a gentle hiss, and in walked David Carter. Wearing worn navy blue coveralls and scuffed work boots, he rolled a mop bucket beside him. A faded cap rested low over his eyes. On his chest, a simple patch that read custodial staff. "Morning, Mr. Carter," said Frank, the security guard, without looking up from his tablet. David nodded with a small smile. "Morning, Frank." Frank glanced up elatedly, then paused. Something about David looked different, but he shook it off. David stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the 38th floor, the executive suite. A young woman in a sleek pantsuit waiting behind him raised an eyebrow. "Janitors don't usually clean that early," she said with a smirk. David replied gently, "Sometimes things need a deep clean before the day begins." She scoffed, checked her phone, and got off at the 27th floor without another word. As the elevator climbed, David's reflection stared back at him in the brushed steel doors. Older now, wiser, but still carrying the same fire behind his eyes. When the elevator chimed and the doors opened, he stepped out into a hallway where everything was too quiet, too clean. Framed abstract art lined the walls, each piece probably worth more than a year's salary. David ran his fingers over the wall absent-mindedly. He knew these halls. He'd cleaned them, waxed the floors, replaced the light bulbs. And now he was back. He approached the receptionist's desk, just outside the glass-encased boardroom. Behind it sat Kayla, no older than 24, sharp bob haircut and sharper attitude. She barely glanced at him. Maintenance isn't allowed up here during meetings." David stopped. "I have business with the board." She laughed without humor, not looking up. "You and every delivery guy in the city." He leaned slightly on the mop handle, unbothered. "Could you just tell them David Carter is here?" Kayla's eyes flicked up, annoyed. "And what department are you with?" David simply smiled. "Ownership." She blinked, then chuckled as if he'd told a joke. "Right. Okay, Mr. Owner, I'm going to have to ask you to wait downstairs. I'll call facilities to check if you're even supposed to be up here." "I can wait right here," David replied, eyes drifting toward the frosted glass boardroom doors. Voices murmured inside, laughter, tension, business as usual. Kayla was already on the phone. "Yeah, there's a janitor up here claiming he's got a meeting with the board." "I know, right?" David didn't react. Instead, he turned and walked toward a small bench near the coffee station, settling down with a patient sigh. The mop bucket sat next to him, quiet like a loyal dog. Executives passed by him, some offering brief, dismissive glances. One man muttered, "They really should schedule cleaning at night." David looked straight ahead, unmoved, because he wasn't there to clean anymore. He was there to change everything. And in just a couple of minutes, he would. The 38th floor of Blake and Hammond Enterprises was a different world. The air was colder, crisper, as if the altitude came with its own form of elitism. Glass walls wrapped around the executive floor like a transparent fortress. Inside, desks gleamed with silver accents, and chairs looked like they cost more than most used cars. Leather briefcases snapped open with precision. The scent of artisanal coffee hung in the air, imported no doubt. David Carter stepped off the elevator with slow, deliberate steps. His boots made the faintest thud against the pristine floor. Heads didn't turn. He didn't belong, after all, not by appearance. He passed a wall of framed photographs, CEO headshots, handshakes with politicians, newspaper clippings celebrating mergers and milestones. At the end of the hall, the executive boardroom glowed softly behind frosted glass. That's when he heard it. "Excuse me?" David turned. At the sleek white reception desk sat Kayla, now noticeably irritated. Her manicured nails clicked against the desk as she tilted her head. "You can't be up here. This floor is for executive staff only." David gave a respectful nod. "I have business with the board." She arched an eyebrow. "Uh-huh. And I've got brunch with Beyoncé." He said nothing. Kayla picked up her phone and spoke into the receiver with the kind of crisp tone reserved for corporate protocol. Yeah, I got someone from maintenance. He's wandered up to the exec floor. Says he has a meeting with the board. David took a step closer. Calm, gentle. I'm not with maintenance. My name is David Carter. I just appreciate it if you pass that along. Kayla stood from her chair now, eyeing him like he was a prank or worse. A security risk. Sir, janitors aren't allowed during meetings. Please head back downstairs. I'll notify facilities. From behind the glass, a few executives glanced up. One of them, Richard Blake, the CEO, caught sight of the interaction and scowled. Who the hell is that? He muttered, sipping his espresso. No idea, replied his assistant. Probably lost. Kayla, still holding the phone, stepped from behind her desk. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the floor. I called security to help escort you back. David gave a small smile. Not smug, not angry, just tired. All right, he said. I'll wait outside. As if on cue, two suited guards appeared from the elevator lobby. Sir, you're going to have to come with us, one said, gently but firmly taking hold of David's elbow. David didn't resist. He let them guide him a few steps back toward the elevators. Behind the glass, the executives had gone back to their discussion. Profit margins, international markets, workforce cuts. But Kayla stood frozen, watching the janitor be quietly led away. Something about him nagged at her. The way he spoke, the way he looked at the boardroom, the way he didn't flinch when humiliated in front of strangers. She sat back down at her desk, half distracted. David stood near the elevators now, hands in his pockets. The mop bucket sat untouched where he'd left it earlier, like a prop from a forgotten role. He looked around once more. The paintings, the glass, the polished pretense of it all. Security looked at him uncertainly. You okay to head down, sir? One of them asked. David nodded, his eyes never leaving the boardroom. I'm fine. I'll just wait a couple minutes. The guard hesitated, then shrugged and returned to his post. David leaned against the wall. Not angry, not embarrassed, just waiting. The kind of waiting a man does when he knows something no one else does. Something they're about to find out. Inside the boardroom, the hum of quiet conversation was muffled by thick glass walls and thicker egos. The table stretched long and sleek, carved mahogany with a mirror finish. 12 chairs lined its edges, each filled with finely tailored executives, their expressions set to bored but important. At the head sat Richard Blake, the CEO, impeccably groomed, early 50s, all charm and sharpness. The kind of man who smiled with his mouth, but never with his eyes. Let's get this circus started, Richard said, flipping open a leather-bound agenda. We got projections to chase, expenses to slash, and stockholders to keep from panicking. Chuckles scattered across the table. Janice Liu, CFO, adjusted her glasses and leaned forward. Quarterly earnings are holding steady, but we're bleeding in operations. Supply chain costs are up 11%. Mark Dalton, head of strategy, sighed. So layoffs again? Of course layoffs again, Richard snapped, rolling his eyes. You want to keep the boardroom champagne cold or not? The room laughed, but Janice didn't. Her pen tapped against her tablet, rhythmically. Warehouse staff, asked Mark. Too noisy, said Greg, head of PR. We just did that in Q1. It'll hit social media. We'll trend for the wrong reasons again. Then we go for the janitorial contracts and third-party ops, Richard said, without pause. Low noise, low blowback. Clean and quiet. No one flinched. It was all just numbers. Janice scrolled down the digital agenda, pausing. There's an odd item here near the bottom. Line 17, ownership share consolidation. D. Carter. Richard frowned and leaned in. Who? D. Carter, she repeated. It's flagged, but has no notes. Came through legal. Greg shrugged. Probably another vending machine vendor pitching a contract. Mark laughed. Yeah. Or the coffee guy finally demanding decent beans. Richard waved it off. Skip it. We'll circle back if it's real. Noted, Janice said, but her eyes lingered on the name. Outside the boardroom, shadows passed behind the frosted glass. The receptionist, Kayla, paced nervously, occasionally glancing back at the doors. Richard turned to the display screen at the end of the room, where graphs showed red arrows and tanking regional profits. "All right," he said, clapping his hands. "Let's talk streamlining." Mark leaned back with a smug grin. "You mean, let's talk cutting the dead weight." "Same difference," Richard smirked. Outside, Kayla's phone buzzed. She answered. "Hello?" "Yes." "He's still here, just waiting. I told him." She froze. Her eyes widened. "Yes. Yes, sir. Right away." She stood, nearly knocking over her coffee, and rushed toward the boardroom. Inside, Richard was mid-sentence. "And if we trim just 3% more, we can inflate next quarter's returns enough to—" The boardroom door opened. Kayla stepped in, eyes full of panic and apology. I'm sorry to interrupt." Richard's expression soured. This better be a fire. "Someone's here to join the meeting," she said quickly. "I didn't authorize any visitors," Richard snapped. Kayla swallowed hard. "He says his name is David Carter." The name landed like a soft echo in the room. Janice blinked. "Wait." Richard scowled. "Who the hell is David Carter?" Kayla hesitated, then held out her phone. "Legal. They're asking you to let him in. They've said he has clearance." The room shifted. Uneasy murmurs. Confused looks. Richard snatched the phone. "This is Blake. What's going on?" He listened for a beat. His eyes narrowed, then widened. He looked up at the room, color draining slightly from his face. "Send him in," he said quietly, and handed the phone back without another word. The room went silent. Outside the glass, David Carter rose from the bench where he'd been waiting patiently. He adjusted his cap, left the mop bucket where it was, and walked slowly, deliberately, toward the boardroom doors. Inside, the executive stared at the glass like a ghost was approaching. Richard cleared his throat, straightened his tie, and forced a smirk. "Well, let's see what kind of janitor legal thinks deserves a seat at this table." The door handle turned, and everything was about to change. Kayla sat at her desk, tapping furiously on her keyboard, still irritated by the morning's awkward interruption. She kept glancing sideways at the mop bucket down the hall, like it was some kind of bad omen. That's when her phone rang. She picked it up without looking. "Blake and Hammond Executive Reception. This is Kayla." A pause. Her smile faded. "Yes, I remember him. The janitor, yes, he's still here, but I already told him to—" Another pause. Longer. Kayla blinked, straightening in her chair. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Her voice lowered into a whisper. "You want me to what?" She turned slowly to look down the hallway. David Carter was still there, calm, still, as if nothing in the world could rush him. One leg crossed over the other, hands resting on his lap, eyes quietly observing the polished floors and pristine walls like he'd seen them 1,000 times before. Kayla's face had gone ghost pale. She hung up and stood abruptly, pushing her chair back with a squeak. Her heels clicked frantically across the floor as she rushed down the corridor. "Mr. Carter," she called, her voice cracking ever so slightly. David turned his head, expression unreadable. She slowed to a near halt when she reached him. "I didn't know. I thought you were—" She couldn't finish the sentence. David looked at her for a long second. "I understand," he said gently. She opened her mouth, then closed it, unsure of what she was even trying to say anymore. Her practiced confidence, the corporate composure, was gone. "I'm really, truly sorry. If I had known—" "You did what you were taught to do," David interrupted softly. "No hard feelings." He stood up, adjusted his jacket, and brushed a faint bit of dust from his sleeve. Not that there was any. Kayla took a shaky step back, watching him walk toward the boardroom as if the marble floor had been built just for his footsteps. David didn't look left or right. He didn't need an escort. He belonged here, and for the first time, she realized it. Inside the boardroom, the chatter had stopped entirely. The glass doors reflected 12 anxious faces. Someone whispered something, but no one responded. Then the doors opened. David stepped inside. No mop, no cart, no uniform in sight except the one they all wore, the one they assumed made them better than him. He scanned the room once, eyes calm but sharp, and gave a polite nod to the room. Richard Blake stood, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice a touch too loud. "Welcome." David looked him in the eye and said nothing. The silence was deafening. Kayla stood outside the glass, frozen in place, watching a man she thought was a janitor walk into Lion's Den like he owned the whole damn zoo. Because, in a way, he did. The boardroom had never been this quiet. Not during layoffs. Not during mergers. Not even during scandals. David Carter stood just inside the doorway, his hands relaxed at his sides. 12 of the most powerful people in the company stared at him as if a ghost had walked through the wall. Richard Blake broke the silence first, clearing his throat with a tight smile. "Excuse me, this room is for executive board members only." David stepped forward calmly, his gaze fixed and unflinching. "I know exactly what this room is for." The warmth drained from Richard's smile. David reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out a leather folder. He walked to the table, heels echoing, and laid it flat in the center like a playing card. The executives leaned in, curious, nervous. With one deliberate motion, David opened a folder and spread several documents across the polished wood. Shareholder certificates, proxy filings, transfer agreements. Janice, the CFO, blinked first. Her eyes scanned the first page, and her lips parted. "Oh my God," she whispered. David's voice was low, firm. 6 weeks ago, I began purchasing controlling shares in this company. Quietly, strategically, through holding accounts and proxy investors. He tapped the top page with a single finger. As of last Thursday, I own 51% of Blake and Hammond Enterprises. Gasps. Richard stepped back like someone had struck him. That's impossible. That would have triggered alerts. Legal would have. They followed protocol. David interrupted. Every move was compliant. Every transfer approved. The board was simply uninformed. Mark muttered. But why? Why would anyone? David turned his eyes on him. Quiet fire behind them. Because I spent 15 years cleaning floors in this building. I learned more watching you from behind a mop bucket than I ever could in business school. Flash. A memory. David sweeping the floor outside a financial presentation, listening quietly as executives debated acquisitions. Flash. David overhearing a conversation in the break room. 2 partners arguing over an investor dropping out. A silent opportunity. He took it. Flash. David late at night in a library, studying investment law. Coffee cold. Determination boiling. Back in the boardroom, no one spoke. David continued. I watched how you treated people. The warehouse workers. The janitors. The interns. As if they were invisible. Replaceable. Forgettable. He looked directly at Richard. And you treated me the same way. Until I became inconvenient. Richard's voice cracked. False bravado leaking through. Even if this is true, ownership doesn't mean authority. You still have to be confirmed by the board. There are procedures. David tilted his head. You're absolutely right. He pulled out one final document. A signed letter of resignation. Everyone leaned in. Janice's jaw dropped. That's your signature, Richard. He turned pale. I spoke to 3 major board members last week. David said calmly. Once they saw the numbers, the trajectory, and your plans to cut another 100 employees just to squeeze the quarterly return, they agreed it was time for a change. David walked slowly around the table as he spoke. Effective immediately, I am the interim CEO of Blake and Hammond Enterprises. Dead silence. Greg, the PR exec, half stammered. But what do you want? David stopped walking. He placed both hands on the table and looked them each in the eyes. I want accountability. I want this company to stop running like a private country club. I want the people who keep these floors clean, the people who unload the trucks, who answer phones, who make this place function, to be seen, respected, and heard. Janice nodded slowly, almost in awe. You really did it. Richard stepped forward, desperate now. You don't know how to run this company. I've already been running it, David said. From the ground up, he picked up the folder and tucked it under his arm. And the first official change under my leadership is that the people who built this company from the ground up will no longer be treated like dirt beneath your shoes. He turned and walked to the door. Greg muttered under his breath, stunned. He was the janitor. David paused at the door, glancing back just once. I was the janitor, he said. Now I'm your boss. And with that, he walked out, leaving behind a room full of silence, shattered egos, and a future none of them could have predicted. 15 years ago. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as David Carter dragged a mop across the floor of a nearly empty downtown office building. The silence of 3 a.m. was familiar now, almost comforting. The night had become his world. David wore headphones as he worked, but they didn't play music. They played lectures, business seminars, audiobooks on leadership and investment. Every swipe of the mop was a note in a silent symphony no one else could hear. At dawn, he'd go home, shower, switch into a wrinkled polo, and take the bus to the community college 3 neighborhoods over. Mr. Carter, you falling asleep on me again? Barked Professor Trenton one morning, tapping a whiteboard with a marker. David jerked awake, blinking. No, sir, just blinking long. Some students laughed. A young white guy leaned across the aisle. Maybe stick to night jobs, man. No offense. David didn't respond. He just picked up his pen and started taking notes again. He didn't talk much in class, but his grades were near perfect. Back at work that night, he cleaned the same floor he did every Tuesday. He overheard 2 executives chuckling near the break room. See the janitor sleeping in econ class this morning? Poor guy thinks he's going to be the next Warren Buffet. Maybe he'll buy the building one day. The other joked. David smiled faintly to himself from behind the vending machine. He didn't need them to believe in him. He believed in himself enough for everyone. Years passed. David graduated with honors. With savings scraped together from janitor work, late-night freelance gigs, and a $3,000 loan from a cousin, he started his own cleaning service, Carter Maintenance Solutions. He knocked on every office door downtown, wearing a second-hand suit and a smile full of hope. Most people turned him away. Some laughed, but few, just a few, said yes. By the 5th year, his cleaning company serviced 6 office parks. Then he expanded, purchased 2 delivery vans. Carter Logistics was born. He started reading the Wall Street Journal every morning. He stopped buying lunch and started buying stocks. Small investments, smart ones. His break came during a supply chain disruption that hit the city hard. One of the companies, Blake and Hammond Enterprises, was desperate for affordable logistics support. David showed up, in person. Mr. Carter, a manager, had said, looking unimpressed. We were expecting someone else. David smiled, cool and steady. I get that a lot. But I've got the vans, the people, and the discipline you're missing. It worked. By the end of that year, Carter Logistics was delivering for 4 regional firms, 2 of them publicly traded. One summer afternoon, David sat in a small restaurant, worn briefcase by his side. He was reviewing quarterly earnings reports when an older man across the aisle chuckled. You remind me of me when I was your age, the man said. David looked up. He recognized him immediately. Eli Masterson, one of the first black CEOs to make Forbes in the 90s. Now long retired, seldom seen in public. David smiled. You're Eli Masterson. Your book changed my life. Eli chuckled. Son, if you're reading balance sheets in a soul food diner, you're already ahead of the game. That conversation turned into coffee. Coffee turned into lunches. Lunches turned into a mentorship. Eli taught David how to think like a boss, not just a hustler. You want a seat at the table? Eli said once, don't beg for it. By the damn table. So David did. He opened shell companies, invested through silent partners, acquired stock slowly, quietly, strategically. He never showed his hand. Every dollar reinvested, every mistake studied, every meeting attended in silence, learning everything the executives didn't know he knew. Years passed. His name appeared on proxy votes, but no one noticed. too busy climbing ladders to look beneath them, until the day his firm quietly acquired the final shares needed to give him majority control of the very company whose floors he used to clean. One evening, standing outside Blake and Hammond's towering glass doors, he looked up. The building hadn't changed much, but he had, from janitor to owner. He ran his fingers along the side of his old employee ID, now just a keepsake in his wallet. "You coming in, Mr. Carter?" his assistant asked from the car. David smiled. "No," he said, "I'm walking." Because every step from the sidewalk to the boardroom was part of the journey, and he intended to feel every one of them. The boardroom was still frozen from the shock. David stood at the head of the table, not just occupying the seat of power, but commanding it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The silence did the work for him. "I appreciate your attention," David began, calm but unwavering, "because now we're going to talk about where this company is headed, not in theory, not in vague projections. Today, the executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Some still looked like they hadn't fully processed what had happened. Effective immediately," David continued, "we're conducting a top-down restructuring. That means realigning leadership, revising compensation, and resetting the moral compass of this company." Richard scoffed. "You're bluffing. You don't just walk into a company and flip the table overnight." David turned to him. "You're right," he said smoothly. "But I didn't walk in overnight. I walked in over 15 years. One step at a time." He pulled a sheet from his folder and laid it on the table. "This is your termination agreement, Richard. It's been reviewed and pre-approved by legal." The room gasped. Richard's jaw dropped. "You can't do this," Richard spat. "I built this company." David tilted his head slightly. "You inherited it. Then you gutted it. You laid off hundreds to line your own pockets. And you use people like me as furniture." I'll fight this," Richard blurted, voice cracking. David didn't flinch. "You're free to, but you'll be fighting a man with majority control, the support of 3 board votes, and a long list of recorded misconduct." Security was already at the door, silent, professional. Richard looked around the room, searching for support. He found none. When he turned back to David, his face was pale with defeat. "Don't worry," David said, holding his gaze. "Your golden parachute's intact, but you won't be remembered for how you landed, only how you flew." Richard stood slowly, glaring at no one in particular, and walked out with the guards trailing him. The door shut behind him with a final metallic click. David exhaled, then looked at the rest of the room. "Now," he said, "let's get to work." He pointed to Janice, the CFO. "I want a full audit of executive bonuses versus employee wages by Friday. We're adjusting the bottom line with fairness in mind." She nodded quickly, eyes wide. "Second, HR will review all promotion policies and recruitment funnels. Effective immediately, our leadership pipeline will reflect the diversity of our workforce. No more corporate cloning." Several heads turned in surprise. "Third," David continued, "our ethics committee is being rebuilt from scratch, with real teeth this time." One by one, the board members nodded, murmuring agreements they wouldn't have considered an hour ago. Then David looked toward the glass wall of the boardroom. Outside, employees had gathered. Word had spread like wildfire. Dozens were watching, janitors, clerks, assistants, IT staff, all wondering if what they were hearing was real. David walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out. Kayla stood just outside, arms stiff at her sides, trying to look busy but clearly rattled. She looked up quickly, color draining from her face. "Mr. Carter, sir, she started, but her voice cracked. "I want to apologize. Truly." David studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You misjudge me," he said quietly. "But more importantly, you misjudge what people are capable of." She nodded, shame flickering in her eyes. "Don't do it again," David said. "To anyone." Kayla nodded again, firmer this time. "I won't." David took one step closer and added, "Everyone deserves a chance to be more than what you see." Behind her, a janitor stood frozen, mop in hand. He was probably only 20, wide-eyed and open-mouthed. David gave him a nod too, then turned back toward the sea of glass and power behind him. "Let's make this company worth working for again," he said loud enough for everyone, inside and out, to hear. For the first time, the building didn't feel cold. It felt like change. 3 weeks later, the building felt different. It wasn't the walls. They were still glass and steel. It wasn't the scent of lemon polish on the floors or the hum of the elevators. It was in the air, lighter, sharper, like a storm had passed and left the sky impossibly clear. David Carter stood in the elevator, buttoned into a navy suit tailored just for him. Crisp shirt, polished shoes, a sharp contrast from the janitor's uniform he wore not so long ago. But he still carried himself the same way, quiet, observant, grounded. Still nodded to the cleaning crew on every floor. Still held the door for interns juggling coffee trays. And he still walked the halls. Not from habit, from purpose, because people noticed who walked the halls. "Morning, Mr. Carter," said an older maintenance worker, pushing a cart full of tools. "Morning, James," David replied with a nod. "How's the new overtime policy treating you?" James grinned. "Haven't had to borrow from my cousin all month. Wife says I'm finally useful." They both chuckled before David moved on. On the second floor, he passed a wall that had once displayed abstract paintings and buzzwords like innovation and excellence. Now it held something new, a photo gallery titled "The People Who Build Us," portraits of janitors, receptionists, drivers, techs, people who had never made the newsletter before. David stopped at the front desk. Kayla stood confidently behind it, posture better, eyes clearer. Her hair was pulled back neatly, a name badge reading not receptionist but community liaison. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said, voice steady. "The mentorship report's on your desk, but I emailed the digital copy too." He smiled. "I saw it. Impressive stats." 3 interns moved to full-time. One's pitching a new onboarding system next week. David raised an eyebrow. "Already?" She beamed. She said she felt seen for the first time. "That changes everything." He nodded thoughtfully. "How about you? Feeling seen?" Kayla looked at him, really looked. "I didn't deserve your forgiveness," she said quietly, "but I've been trying to earn it anyway." David paused, then said, "Keep doing what you're doing. You're turning the front desk into the heart of the building." She blinked. "That's a very poetic way to put it." He grinned. "Don't tell anyone I have a soft side. I've got a reputation to maintain." As he walked toward his office, more staff greeted him. Engineers, legal assistants, janitors who now had name badges too. Everyone moved like they mattered, because now they did. He passed the executive boardroom where meetings still took place, only now with open doors, rotating seats, and input from every department. Transparency wasn't just a buzzword now. It was glass walls and open voices. David paused at one door near the loading dock, a door most execs never noticed. The janitor's closet. He opened it gently. Still organized. Still clean. A faint smell of disinfectant and bleach lingered in the air like memory. He stood in the doorway for a beat, ran his fingers along the wooden handle of the old mop, then closed the door quietly, almost reverently. It's funny. The world looks at you one way for so long, they forget to ask who you really are. They don't see your late nights, your long walks, your quiet fire. But sometimes the ones they overlook are the ones who change everything. David turned and walked back into the light of the hallway, toward the future he had built with steady hands, and a heart that refused to quit.